This week on Africa Update, Mali holds referendum on new constitution ahead of February 2024 election. How will this change the political trajectory of the country? Also on the program, Senegal takes stock of damages after violent protests over sentencing of opposition leader Sonko. Plus, our highlight of stories from across the continent on Roundup Africa. This is Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilya. Welcome. Malians on Sunday, 18 June, in a referendum vote on fundamental constitutional proposition that will see to a transition of power to a civilian government in February 2024 after almost 3 years of a military junta. The referendum, scheduled for 9th of July 2017, was postponed thrice before the military junta on May 5th announced in a decree that it will be conducted on June 18. While some argue that the military junta does not have the legitimacy to hold a constitutional referendum, the president of the transition, Assimi Goïta, sees it as the culmination of a process of democratic renewal. Although the drafting of the new constitution was boycotted by some political parties, civil society groups, among other key stakeholders, the new constitution will be the statute with which the country will be administered. Does the new constitution have the legitimacy required? Joining me to talk about this is Philip Pandey, who joins me virtually from Kisumu in Kenya. He is a policy analyst. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining us on Africa Update today.
Very well. Many thanks once again for having me. This time I'm joining you from Nairobi, Kenya, the capital of Kenya.
Oh, great.
30 miles away from Bamako, the center of epicenter of action this weekend.
Well, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining, really. Well, let's begin. I believe that you've been following what's happening in Mali, and there's a major issue or controversy, if you like, around the legitimacy of this new constitution that the country is now being voting on it in a referendum. What do you make of the legitimacy? Some see that, they say that, look, this transitional government is a military government, is a military junta. It took over power by force, and so it lacks the legitimacy to conduct a referendum, a constitutional referendum for that matter. What do you make of this?
Very well, over and above all factors prevailing in Mali, I think it's a good thing for Mali to have a new constitution finally. There have been many episodes of coups and counter-coups exchanging right from 1968, from the first president being deposed. And therefore, I'm quite aware that Mali and the citizenry of Mali are fully aware of circumstances that have surrounded their democracy, their governance systems. And it's notable to say that it's only one president out of the 63 years of independence of Mali that has left office without having to be, deposed out of power. That is save for, transition presidents always acting in capacity and on behalf of the military. So legitimacy may be a main thing, but looking at the circumstances that have surrounded the quest for constitution right from 1992, when the last referendum was held in Mali. There was a postponement in 2012, there was a postponement in 2021. There is a need to finally have this. So yes, I do not support military and authoritarianism, but there is a need for a new constitution so that Mali has a new feeling of what democracy may finally look like.
Given the history of Mali, like you have highlighted, could there be a justification then for making the president under this new constitution so powerful that he can actually dissolve a parliament? That's a major issue that some civil groups have raised concerns about.
Very well, Ayub. I must mention that it will be a scary thing for Mali. But many democracies, presidents actually have the power to dissolve parliament. A good example is our own democracy in Kenya. The president may dissolve parliament, and that would be a situation of crisis. In countries and democracies such as Mali that have experienced authoritarianism and a lot of military rule, there must be legitimate fears and actual fears that a more powerful president would mean the center of power in one person and everything collapsed to a presidential system. But there are several ways of governance. You could choose the parliamentary way, you could choose the presidency way, you could choose a semi-presidential way, which is the current situation in Mali. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that the citizens may have such fears that the person proposing this is a military junta who took over power from an elected president. But before then, we know that 9 months before the actual coup that we're talking about, there was yet another coup, of course, supported by the same person in power. But nonetheless, many democracies, I would say, have the presidents having the powers to dissolve parliament.
Well, talking about the president of the transition himself, Assimi Goïta, there's every likelihood that we know he could contest an election as a civilian president, but that's just by the way. Now, still talking about the powers of the president, he has some powers, according to the Constitution, to interfere with the judiciary. So in this case, he's a chair of the Supreme Council of the Judiciary under this new constitution. And it can also, kind of interfere with, certain administrative and military, structures and the rest of them. Take us through some of those provisions.
So a mixed reaction on that. Whereas dissolving parliament may not be one of the key issues, I'm quite skeptical about the president's involvement in the judiciary, for example. I'll give an example of Kenya. Initially, the president was actually the president of the Supreme Court or the judiciary, for that matter. He appointed judges and did all that appertain to that. Whereas we moved from that constitution in 2010, and much of the powers were shifted to a parliament in the process, and of course the Judicial Service Commission and public service, for that matter, the president still swears in most of the judges, especially the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal judges. That was also even witnessed in the recent election, where our own president, His Excellency William Ruto, brought in some 6 controversial judges that had been disallowed by the former president. It's a thin line. It's a delicate balance between what the president can do and what he cannot do. When you choose the presidential system, like I'm saying, there are quite a number of benefits and disadvantages, for that matter. Looking at Mali and what has been proposed, I like the constitutional reforms. One, they are saying that they are redefining Mali so that citizens have an innate right to vote, and that's through universal suffrage, and it must be secret, for that matter. They are talking about introduction of 2 new regions in the volatile northern Mali. They're talking about introduction of a court, audit court or auditor's court for that definition, as they put it. They're talking about incorporation of the Senate, so a bicameral parliamentary system where, of course, Again, a third of the Senate members would be appointed by the president. But they're also talking about recognition of cultural and religious authority, so that they may also help in decision making. They may help in solving conflict and making the governance space a better space.
Okay. Okay, Philip. Yeah. So, given the circumstances, how can the people of Mali guarantee or ensure or be sure that that checks and balance happens under a government where you have this legislature, you have the executive and the judiciary meant to complement each other by performing some kind of oversight functions on each other? How do you guarantee when the president, that's the head of the executive, have such powers to meddle in whatever the other institutions are doing?
Well, one thing that Mali for sure must be proud of is the distinct definition of the executive, the parliament, of course now being bicameral, and the presidency. Initially, they had what they called government, and government and the assembly, and of course the presidency. And most of the time they are referring to what we call government as being the authority. But what's really government? It's the executive, it's the judiciary, it's the assembly of parliament. And I would dare say that the citizens and oversight responsibility must be bestowed upon elected leaders, elected members of parliament. And of course, the civil society playing its role. I mentioned also that the religious and cultural beliefs or cultural authority is going to be respected. Therefore, it means that they're going to have a more robust governance system. And if all these players are incorporated in serving the people and in setting the space and setting the bar for Mali, then we should see a difference. There are a lot of trust issues, and we expect that of a democracy that has been affected by situations of violence and turmoil. But then everybody has to play their roles. My belief, and my firm belief for that matter, is that the military rule should come to an end, and the military president should give way, especially after delivering a constitution which has been waited for well over 30 years in Mali today.
Okay, talking about the role of the military coming to an end, Philip, it looks like it's not yet, or we are not about to see the end of the role of the military, given that the new constitution enables the army, for instance, to participate in the economic, social, and cultural development and environmental protection of the country. And that's according to Article 89 of the new draft. It says that the military will be responsible for ensuring the enforcement of law and will be able to leave the barracks if law is violated, and in this case by the civil power. So some say that this is more like constitutionalizing military coup.
Controversial in every sense, Ayub, and Article 89, for that matter, should not even be a matter of discussion in this aspect. When we're talking about constitutionalism, one thing that Mali is departing from, and I hope the people of Mali are trying to get away from, is the volatility and the ease with which military authorities or colonels and majors take over government. It is needful that some of these articles be relooked into in previous developments, successive development. Constitutional making process is an ongoing process. Many countries have amended their constitutions. They've used parliament to amend controversial articles. They've introduced bills that tend to improve human rights standing, and of course the rule of law. So talking about the rule of law and the position of the military in this regard, there is need for the next government especially that would come into office to look at the controversial aspects. Okay. One thing that the Malian community may not join at this particular time is the choice of what to vote for or not. Because, of course, there is a yes and no possibility in this referendum. But looking at the manner in which it has been declared, the background is emanating from the military. So we expect that the military would find ways of favoring themselves and ensuring that some of their interests are taken care of. But whoever is sitting in power today must be fully cognizant of the fact that it is not military rule forever. In the growth of democracy, in the maturity of democracy, there is need to promote civilian rule rather than military authoritarianism.
Okay, well, there's also another part of the draft constitution that, makes the 13 national languages in Mali official. Now, French is no longer now the official language, but more of a working language, or whatever that means. So a situation where you have 13 official languages in one country, how exactly are the citizens supposed to, communicate and, where people do not understand each other? I'm just curious.
I'm looking at the background of all these and where Mali is coming from. One of the controversies has been the claim by opposing forces that there was so much involvement of the French or former colonizers of Mali in their governance. And that has caused previous military takeovers. We remember that at some point, I think in 2017 or thereabout, the president of France, His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, was in Mali. And after that, there was a lot of difference in how the opposition, the military, operated with the presidency. So one of the issues, and actually if you look at Mali today, the military rule and regime has departed and parted ways with France. Looking at their leaning now, they are more of looking east towards Russia, and those are the controversies that have led to demoting French as a national language to just a working language. Of course, it had to be a working language because Mali for many years has been known to be a francophone country, and most of their transactions has been done using the French as the national language. While this constitution supports indigenous communities, supports indigenous languages, and tries to bring to the fore regions that perhaps have excluded from governance, it is impossible to transact in 13 official languages. Diversity is such a good thing, but accepting that there should be a convergence in all that diversity is something that should drive nationalism. So, I hope that they get a way to build consensus and convergence towards a working language and a national language. And if they could build that consensus in retaining what their official language was formerly, then that would make it easy for transaction, would make it easy for building coalitions, it would make it easy to collaborate and cooperate with other regions as well.
Okay, Philip.
I'm one of the persons that do not believe that Africa should be defined in the lines of Anglophone, Francophone.
Okay.
But there has to be a national language.
Okay, Philip, there are those who think that the designation of Mali as a secular state is against their religion, and they are offering other interpretations or clauses. Instead of, a secular state, they are offering, things like, multi-faith state instead. So what do you make of that part of the new constitution? In 1 minute.
The constitution comes both with some good things and bad things at the same time. For example, in defining Mali in that preamble, they say that it's one sovereign, independent, indivisible, But again, spoils that by introducing the aspect of secularism. Of course, also saying that Mali is a social republic, but social and secular. Those would go into then philosophies of governance. For example, we know that many of social states or the socialists have for many years been threatened by capitalists by a mixed system of governance where you take care of the welfare but also promote economic progression and hard work. But putting in secularism must not work well with religious people, and I'm fully aware that has to generate some heat.
In its defense, the government says that this is about promoting freedom of thought. This is not about any particular religion, but to allow Malians to decide whatever faith or belief that they want to belong to.
That argument is neither here nor there. You can't choose to be extreme in every definition that you put in a constitution. There has to be middle ground. That is where there has to be public participation. There has to be the incorporation of the thoughts of religious and cultural leaders for that matter.
All right, Philip, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to go because of time. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update and sharing your perspectives with us.
Very well, once again, thank you. Ayub, it's a pleasure always ventilating on important matters that affect our continent, the continent of Africa. Right. And of course, Mali is the 7th largest nation. We need it intact. We need it progressing.
All right, thank you. Thanks a lot. All right, now you're watching Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. After the break, Senegal takes stock of damages after violent protest over sentencing of opposition leader. Details and more shortly. Welcome back. This is Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Now, Senegal is taking stock of damage after the sentencing of prominent opposition figure Ousmane Sonko sparked 3 days of deadly unrest, the worst the country has seen in decades. In this report, we take a look at the impact of the violent protest on Senegal's economy.
Senegal is recovering from the worst unrest the country has seen in decades. The sentencing of opposition figure Ousmane Sonko led to 3 days of protests which saw infrastructure damaged and public transport torched. The partly state-funded bus company Dem Dik was a common target during protests. More than 70 of its buses were torched and around 20 smashed with rocks. Ousmane Silla is chief executive of Dem Dik and said the riots cost the company a lot of money.
In the protests of the past week, we have seen an upsurge of major significance in losses. We estimate the buses that were stoned, looted and burned amount to the equivalent of more than $5.75 million in losses for Dakar Dem Dik.
Silla said it would take around 15 consecutive days of calm for the company to bounce back fully. Stalled operations can cost Dem Dik up to $80,000 in losses per day and make it difficult for thousands of commuters to get to work. Njai Cisse buys goods in Senegal's capital, Dakar.
If these buses are destroyed, we will feel it. This is a means of transport that is at our doorstep and allows everyone to move around without difficulty. It is harder for us, the workers. When you burn what belongs to everyone, it is not the state that will feel it, but your fellow citizens.
The government estimates the unrest could slow economic output by an equivalent of around $33 million per day. More than a dozen were killed and hundreds injured when security forces clashed with protesters. Sonko's supporters saw his conviction as a political attempt to stop him running for president next year. The government denies this. Sonko was first detained for alleged rape 2 years ago, which led to the start of an ongoing legal battle.
Now, for a highlight of stories from across the African continent, let's take a look at Roundup Africa.
A group of African leaders and high-ranking officials on Friday arrived in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, with the aim of facilitating dialogue between the warring parties involved in the Ukrainian conflict and ultimately achieving peace. The delegation consisted of the presidents of South Africa, Senegal, Zambia and the Comoros Islands. As their first order of business, they visited Bucha, a suburb of Kyiv which had witnessed the aftermath of the conflict last year as Russian troops had abandoned their campaign to seize the capital, leaving behind scattered civilian bodies. In addition to the heads of state, the African delegation included senior officials from Egypt and the Republic of the Congo. The African Peace Initiative comes at a time when Ukraine has launched a counter-offensive using advanced weapons provided by Western nations in an effort to reclaim the occupied terrorists along the extensive 1,000-kilometer front line. The Zimbabwean parliament has given its approval to a staggering hike in the fees imposed on prospective presidential candidates, raising the amount from $1,000 to $20,000. This decision has sparked criticism from the opposition, who view it as discriminatory. The Citizens Coalition for Change, CCC, the main opposition party, has voiced concerns that these candidacy fees unjustly target individuals based on their economic status, effectively excluding those who are economically disadvantaged. Furthermore, this move is seen as a violation of the country's constitution. Scheduled for August 23rd, Zimbabwe is preparing for both presidential and parliamentary elections. The incumbent President Emmerson Mnangagwa, aged 80, has faced allegations of suppressing dissenting voices. His primary opponent in the upcoming elections will be Nelson Chamisa, a 45-year-old lawyer and pastor who leads the CCC. In addition to the exorbitant presidential candidacy fees, the fees for participating in parliamentary and senatorial elections have also seen a significant increase, now requiring $1,000 compared to the previous amount of $50 in 2018. And that's it on Roundup Africa.
With that, we wrap up Africa Update for this week. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. I am Ayuba Ilya. Join us again next time. Bye for now.